Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today, let's talk about the Trump Putin Peace Summit. I'm going to be reviewing a video by Professor John Mearsheimer, who talked extensively about how the summit went. And you know, before Trump got elected for the second time, he was always saying that if he was president, that he'd stop the Russia-Ukraine war on day one. Now, obviously, this is more than a year down the line, and that hasn't happened. Which just shows that Trump is all bluff and no substance. When Zelensky came to him to visit him at the White House, Trump put him through so much humiliation, saying, "You don't hold all the cards, I hold all the cards." So if Trump held all the cards, he should have been able to get, some sort of resolution to the conflict at this point in time. But he hasn't been able to. That's because Trump doesn't have any card. And if you watch that interaction between him and Putin, Putin seemed very much more confident, much more comfortable in his position. Trump just seemed tired. Like he felt like all the energy, all the life was out of him. He didn't have any fight in him anymore. He couldn't push because there's nothing for him to do. He literally, at this point, he's literally doing the bidding of Vladimir Putin. He said he was going to put some sanctions on Putin. That didn't happen. He said he's going to put some secondary sanctions on other countries that are trading with Russia. Obviously, that's not going to happen. So uh, Putin is playing Trump like a fiddle, and Trump seems to be very enamored by this man. This guy is always he's always taken by strong figures, people who he thinks are strong political figures. That's why he would praise King Jong Un. That's why he even praised the Houthi fighters that these people are tough. It almost looks like a gay relationship between Putin and Trump at this point in time. So let's just go through what Professor Miyashima says about this that summit.
I expect that today's agreement will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the US. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities.
Well, I think that Putin obviously did a brilliant job of handling himself in yesterday's meeting. There's just no question about that. And that's really all he had to do was come and look diplomatic, look smart, look respectful of President Trump. And it would do a great deal to put an end to his isolation in the West and give him Putin said there will be no ceasefire. We have to have a peace agreement. And in fact, Trump has now backed off from demanding a ceasefire. And he said to someone after the meeting that the best solution to this problem is to go directly to a peace agreement. In other words, putting the ceasefire that the Ukrainians and the Europeans and many people in the United States want aside. He's saying that's a non-starter after having talked to Putin. The advantage.
Yeah, so this could easily happen with Putin just stopping his aggression against Ukraine. Putin started this war. No matter how you want to rationalize that the West provoked Putin into doing this, but the West did not attack Russia. NATO did not attack Russia. Ukraine did not attack Russia. Russia attacked Ukraine for a perceived threat. Why should it be allowed for one nation to lord it over another nation, to decide for another nation what sort of military alliances they go into, what sort of economic alliance they go into? Ukraine is a sovereign nation. Ukraine should very well be able to do whatever it likes. If Russia doesn't like it, well, then it's no one's business. If Ukraine had attacked Russia with NATO forces, then this would be justified. This is you can't punish someone for a crime they haven't yet committed. So Putin's whole basis for this invasion is hogwash. And the reason why I really say it's hogwash is when Putin had that interview with Tucker Carlson, and I was very disappointed at Putin because I thought he was going to give some very substantive reason why the war was going on. But he just went into a weird history lesson about how Ukraine is not really an independent state, but ultimately a part of Russia. And that just exposed the mentality to me that this isn't really about NATO aggression. This is just a land grabbing effort and an effort to perpetuate himself in power.
Of a ceasefire are mainly that Ukraine is losing on the battlefield, and the West cannot do much to help it at this point in time. So if you can create a ceasefire, put an end to the fighting on the battlefield, that gives the Ukrainians a respite, number one. And number two, it allows them to get more arms from the West to build up their forces and then put up a better fight against the Russians moving forward once the fighting restarts. In other words, once the ceasefire ends. But the Russians are not dummkopf, and they understand if they're winning, it would be nuts, to put it bluntly, for them to stop the war when they're winning, allow the Ukrainians to recover, and then fight more effectively at some point down the road. So the Russians have no interest in a ceasefire. Ukraine and the West really like the idea. What the Russians want is they want a peace agreement. They want to settle this one, but they want to settle it on their terms. It's very important to understand this. The Russians view...
What sort of nonsense settlement is that? You want to settle a conflict on your terms? And come on, it means you don't want to settle the conflict, because any settlement there has to be compromise. So if Russia is wanting to have its way, then it actually is not looking for a settlement. It wants to win outright. And if it wants to win outright, then it should keep fighting on the battlefield.
Ukraine joining NATO as an existential threat.
Why is Ukraine joining NATO an existential threat? Why? Russia is a nuclear armed state. NATO is not crazy enough. NATO is not crazy enough to attack Russia. It's not. This is a... Even North Korea, as small as North Korea is, the US will still be careful with dealing with North Korea because it has nuclear weapons. Not to talk of Russia, the country with the biggest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world. So this threat of NATO to... Now, I hold no brief for NATO. I think NATO, they have their issues, but this is just a nonsense. It's a nonsense argument, in my opinion.
This war for them is existential, and they have a set of demands that they will not compromise on. And there are three principal demands. One is that Ukraine and the West recognize that Russia has annexed those four oblasts that they now partially occupy, four oblasts in Ukraine, plus Crimea. That's demand number one. Demand number two is that Ukraine be a neutral state. That means it can't be in NATO and there can't be Western security guarantees, especially a security guarantee from the United States. Ukraine, from the Russian perspective, has to be neutral. Third demand is that Ukraine has to disarm, not completely, but disarm to the point where it has no offensive military capability, i.e., it can't threaten Russia.
Now, what sort of agreement is this? You're essentially saying Ukraine should become a slave to Russia, because if those three conditions are met, then Ukraine has lost its independence. It's not a sovereign nation. It's not a sovereign state. If it's going to cede territory to Russia, if it's going to be neutral and have no security guarantees, meaning that Russia can come in at any time to attack it to take more territory. Remember, Russia started with Crimea. Now Russia wants four regions, the four oblast regions in Ukraine. So what stops Russia from coming tomorrow to take more territory, especially given the fact that Ukraine is now neutral, doesn't have any security guarantees, now it's disarmed, it doesn't have an effective military that can carry out offensive warfare against Russia. What sort of agreement is this? How can any sane person agree to something like this? No rational person should have to agree to just give away your dignity, give away your rights, give away your sovereignty, and become a vassal state of Russia. That's essentially what Putin wants. Putin wants to slowly but surely absorb Ukraine into the Russian Federation. That's what I see. That's the only way these terms make any sense. Remember that there was an agreement that if Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, that Russia wasn't going to attack it. Russia did not keep to that agreement. So why should anyone believe that Russia would keep to these agreements now? Supposing Ukraine agreed to these 3 points, what's to prevent Russia from attacking tomorrow? Nothing.
Now, these are three harsh demands from the Ukrainian point of view and from the West point of view. These are unacceptable demands to the Ukrainians and to most people in the West. And this is why you can't get a peace agreement. So, what we have here is the Russians want a peace agreement. The Ukrainians in the West have no interest in a peace agreement. The West and the Ukrainians want a ceasefire, and the Russians have no interest in a ceasefire.
Right.
And the end result is you have a very short meeting and you have no agreement.
So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate. And I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Radcliffe. Thank you very much. We have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world, and I look forward to dealing. interfered with by the Russians.
I think there's one very important dimension to what Trump said that we don't want to lose sight of. And that is, I think he's passing the torch to Zelensky. I think in a very important way, Trump has
Passing the torch to Zelensky after saying Zelensky holds no cards, that he has all the cards. Where are Trump's cards?
come to understand that he can't settle this one, right? There's no way he can agree, Trump, to a peace agreement and convince the Ukrainians, the Europeans, and the Western foreign policy establishment that that's the smart thing to do, right? And he can't convince Putin to agree to a ceasefire. So what can Trump do? And of course, what Zelensky says he should do is put secondary sanctions on Russia. And we can talk about that because this meeting was in good part about secondary sanctions and Trump's interest in secondary sanctions in the past. But Trump understands. He was asked afterwards what this means for secondary sanctions. There are going to be no secondary sanctions. At least at this point, says Trump. So the sanctions are off the table. The ceasefire is off. Go to the White House. I believe Putin there. But it's up to them.
So what does this say about Trump? Trump has no leverage. There's nothing he can do at this point in time. It's just all talk and no action. Said he had all the cards. Now he cannot even play any card. He can't even talk to his buddy Putin to get him to stop the aggression. And what would you expect from someone like Trump? I didn't expect anything better. Anyway, that's just the show for today. Like, share, subscribe. I'll catch you in another live stream. It's bye for now.